Hello, everybody. Welcome to First Fridays in the Exchange and our monthly art talk. We're not in the Exchange right now, as you can see, but the Exchange is still there with artists and galleries and independent businesses and restaurants dealing as best they can with some very difficult circumstances. So please check out our social media to find out more about what's happening there and how people in the Exchange are finding ways to connect. I'd like to thank First Fridays in the Exchange, especially Karen Schultz, who does so much work behind the scenes. I'd like to thank Collective Broadcast Co., who's helping with the tech tonight. I'd like to thank everybody who's joining us, whether that's live or later. And just to let you know, you can use the chat function to ask questions at any time, and we'll make room for questions at the end as well. And I'd especially like to thank our guest tonight, Alexandra Ross, an emerging multimedia artist based in Mitchell, Manitoba. Alexandra studied at the University of Manitoba School of Art, obtaining her BFA last year. She works in clay, photography, printmaking, as well as assemblage pieces that incorporate found objects with those media. She's exhibited at the Steinbach Cultural Arts Center and in group shows in Winnipeg. So tonight we want to talk about arting, that's Alexandra's word, in rural areas. And I think, part of the sort of historical myth of the artist in that sort of high art European tradition is that you come to the city, that the center of the universe, wherever that might be at the time, Rome, Paris, New York, and then you become an artist. And of course, obviously, this is just a myth. There have always been people making art outside of that model and outside of those institutions. But I think the idea kind of persists as a way of thinking. And I'm a city girl, and cultural institutions, cultural workers here in Winnipeg are often encouraged to think beyond the perimeter, is the phrase. But that's a very kind of urban-centric way of framing it. It's like you're in the city looking out. And I guess tonight we'll try to look from outside and talk about that experience. The whole framing of it. I mean, I wouldn't be asking an urban artist, why do you choose to stay in the city? Or, what's it like to make art in the city? We just take those things for granted. And I think part of the issue of being a rural artist is the idea of making art in rural places is kind of set apart. And paradoxically, things like this talk are also setting it apart. But, and I certainly don't want Alexandra to feel she has to kind of like justify herself for living out in the country. And I'm sure many of Alexandra's experiences as an emerging artist, she shares with any other artist. And there are more commonalities than differences, but there are unique challenges and opportunities in being a rural artist. And so, yeah, let's start and talk about those. So, first of all, there's a lot of practical stuff, right?
Yeah, there's the whole idea of the perimeter, as you mentioned, this idea that you can reference this road, and we all know what you're talking about. Like, that's right. Interesting. Yeah. Manitoba is so unique in the sense that it has one city center. And if you go to other prairie provinces, there's at least two other major city centers. Yeah. The population is divided, and Manitoba is really unique in that there's a major city center that holds, I think we were talking about half the population of the province.
Right.
So there's this intense concentration in the province itself. So to be an artist in Manitoba is like to experience a kind of a divide, whether you locate yourself inside the perimeter or outside the perimeter.
Right.
And I think it's important to also note that it's not just artists who experience this, like whether you're trying to engage a social service or so many of the specialized resources or even not so specialized resources are concentrated in the city center.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We hog resources and attention and
Well,
yeah.
by necessity, right? Like, and it becomes this interesting dynamic where, because there's this concentration in the city, people move to the city because there's opportunities and there's people. Like, people are great, as we know now. Like, it's like we're all missing people, and the impact of not being around people is huge. Um, so yeah, if you're in Manitoba, you just by where you decide to locate yourself, you will experience this. Either you're inside this box or the circle, as it were.
Mhm.
Inside a circle or you're not, and based on your location, that determines a lot of things. Uh,
Right. Um, and there's a lot of distance and a lot of driving often, right?
right, because all of the resources are concentrated in the city. So if you do decide to locate yourself outside the city, then to access those things. And so, speaking specifically of the art
Mhm.
world, uh, then yeah, whether you're accessing a gallery space, opportunities, or your materials, like just purchasing materials can be a
Right.
thing, is a thing.
Yeah. And can we just maybe see the maps, the Google Maps? Okay. So
Right.
that
So
just
I sent you
yeah,
just like two like Google Map locations, and
yeah.
note that I'm not actually pinging the location to Winnipeg. I'm um, uh, I'm part of a mentorship program, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But what I did was I as you can see, the blue dot is where I am. That's Mitchell, and Mitchell is 3 hours away from the gallery that the mentorship program will be exhibiting in.
Okay.
So if we're thinking about the art world infrastructure, the typical way of exhibiting and attending the space and talking to a curator, making that connection, it requires a lot of resources, like time resources. So whether and not just like galleries, whether it's purchasing work. I'm an hour outside the city, so I have I should just say that I have like a pretty accessible route to the city.
Yeah.
I can be downtown in an hour, so I can attend events.
Right.
Um, so when we're thinking about like the art world infrastructure as a thing, um, all of the things that are required to become a professional artist, and I'm talking about things that like the Manitoba Arts Council or the Canadian Council for Arts. Like, there are
Mhm.
certain criteria that you need to be considered a professional artist. So
Yeah.
as you're emerging your practice outside the perimeter, you're having to think about like those opportunities. So professional peer recognition,
Yep.
specialized training,
Yep.
a history of public presentation is my favorite, because like how where do you present? Like, do I present? Does a little talk at the library, at the local library, does that count? Like, what is a history of present public presentation?
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, yeah, so there's like a whole bunch of like practical things that if
Yeah.
you're located outside of that concentration of resources, you either have to think creatively,
Yeah.
or you end up with this thing of like, well, maybe I should move to the city, because that's where that's where the opportunity is, and that's what I maybe should do.
Right. And you've talked about this being a kind of a self a perpetuating cycles, a kind of rural brain drain, so that the more that you need to go to the city to find these things, the more people go there, and then the more like the next generation has to go there and
Yeah, you have like this draining of these cultural, like this absence of cultural workers in rural centers, because it's just really difficult. You have this dilemma, like, do I emerge, do I go to the city to become a professional artist?
Mhm.
Or the thing that I feel that I'm left with is, if I'm going to stay in rural Manitoba, what I need to do is create the momentum that I need to emerge my practice. So that means I have to wear these hats of being like a curator and thinking outside the typical box, because there is no gallery space. So then where do I go? How do I create opportunities and make work for myself, build an audience, educate an audience sometimes, and create opportunities that are considered indicators of a professional art practice. And so I'm thinking outside the box because I have to.
Yeah. And and you talked about like in terms of art supplies, that you couldn't necessarily, like, it's not so hard for you because you're now outside the city, but for a lot of ours, you can't just, buy something on a whim, or you're making something and you think,
Right.
oh, I need this, it's like you have to go in and get a whole bunch of stuff at once and stock up. And but then you also talked about the fact that rural people in general, and maybe rural artists as well, are resourceful, right? You figure out how to do things with what you have, and borrow things from your neighbor. And
for sure, yeah. The whole thing about being in a rural setting and maybe having a gas station, like Mitchell has a gas station and a convenience store. So I can go to Steinbach, but even Steinbach has like a very small store where I can purchase some art supplies. But the bulk of material I will go to Winnipeg for. And so I'm only, as I said, an hour outside. But if you live over 2 hours to like that, a round trip is half of a day. So you're committing yourself to a full day of material gathering. If you have a practice that is spontaneous or requires experimentation, you can't necessarily anticipate all of the things that you're going to need in any given situation. So either you have to purchase in bulk what you believe you might need in this practice, in your practice, or you have to be extremely resourceful, or you have to compromise your practice on some and actually like committed to your vision, and your practice is one of the indications of a professional artist, or like one of the requirements to be a professional artist. So if you're committing to your material and you need that thing, then take a half day, go to Winnipeg, get that thing, and then come back. Like it's a much bigger thing to sustain a practice outside in a place that doesn't have as many resources.
Right. Now, in terms of technology, which is one of the tools that rural artists can use, although there are caveats with that, which I guess we'll talk about. But I mean, this talk, for example, is made much easier by the fact that nobody has to like drive an hour in and another hour out, and that the audience, there could be people far away watching it, which is terrific. So the pandemic, for months at a time has shut down gallery spaces physically, which is a loss, but on the other hand, Zoom has actually increased the accessibility of culture in many ways for many people. So like if you have artist talks and artist panel discussions and even some studio visits, I know are going on virtually. So does that help rural artists?
Yeah, I think what's happened, and I think the most exciting thing to me that, can I say this? The most exciting thing about the pandemic is this like normalization of the use of technology in the art world. And like I think I should just note that like had we as a society been listening to voices about accessibility, we would have been way ahead of this, and we could have had the technology and the experience to know how to go virtual. But we didn't, and this has been a huge learning curve for all of us. But now that it's in place, I'm really hoping that it sticks around and that it becomes something that we use and normalize So that if you are an artist who lives outside the perimeter, or whatever, like if you don't have the ability to get to a gallery space to deliver an artist talk, it's still an option for you to talk about your practice and your work remotely. Like that a year ago, like how many of us were thinking like that?
Yeah.
And now we don't even blink an eye. Like it's just a normal thing. So I think the potential for technology to like just bust open some of those huge barriers that many people, not just rural people, have experienced getting into the art world is going to be critical. I think there's still big challenges, like so you can be invited to deliver something, an artist talk or a presentation, but how do you have that informal networking? Like, how do you, like, you don't bump into people online like this. So,
that's right.
So there's some challenges still to think around, but the bridge is there.
Right. And when we were just prepping for this talk, just doing the tech stuff, and we were also talking to Aaron, who's handling the tech, and he lives in Gimli. You were pointing out, and again, this is like a city person, I just, I don't even think about this, but of course, internet access is not uniform across the province either, and that's an issue.
It's not even uniform in Mitchell. Like we're maybe 10 minutes out of Steinbach, and an hour to the city. And if you're on one side of the highway, you have a different internet than the other side of the highway. So like it's incredible.
That's just terrifyingly arbitrary.
Except that there's really practical reasons, I'm sure, that these things exist. And so then thinking around like those challenges of who has internet and who doesn't, or who has high speed internet and who doesn't, or who has certain types of access to this tool that we're all relying on, becomes a, you can either do this thing or you can't.
Right. So let's talk about a sense of place, I guess. You've moved a lot in your life as a child, and then you say I love this term, crash landed in Manitoba in 2004, and now you're putting down roots in Mitchell, Manitoba. And so how has that affected some of your art? And let's look at some of the works you're sort of working on right now.
Right. Well, it's hugely affected my work. I think during art school, I was exploring a lot of different ideas, and found that I would just naturally go back to my own personal narrative for inspiration. Like, that's all I know. It's my experience, so I'm going to make work from it. And just assume that once I was done with art school, I'd be done with that personal stuff and like tackle big topics like chaos theory. Like that's where I'll land. But have found that I just my personal narrative just keeps emerging. And so one of the things that the mentorship program, Brenna George has worked, is our mentor. So I know we're going to talk about mentorship and the role, but one of the things that happened was she was saying it's best if you can focus your energy and just choose, one thing, like don't spread yourself too thin, that kind of idea. And so under her mentorship, I decided, all right, I will do personal narrative for a year and start making work around personal narrative. So my whole body of work that I'm developing right now is all about personal narrative, and roots figure very strongly in that. So as you can see, this literal root. So I love assemblage sculpture, and I work with clay, and I find like I could just like install a root ball on the wall and call it a work and walk away and be happy with it. Like, I just think roots are incredible. Like a root, when you look at a root, you see this tree that has like made these decisions. So the decisions of where it sends its root is no longer visible, but we can see where the root went. So it's like this playing with presence and absence and all of these life decisions that get made in a lifetime that shape, and then like it crystallizes us, and we find ourselves in Mitchell, Manitoba, when we had no intention of being here, and here we are, and we're making this is where we've landed, and this is where we're deciding to emerge our professional art practice. So this idea of these decisions, and that roots are this beautiful metaphor for this, and then the kind of what happens in a personal narrative where you have like these experiences that you sometimes weave together, and sometimes you just they're there.
Okay. Do you want maybe see the next slide? Okay, so what are we looking at here?
Yeah, so this is a found object, a spoon that I found, I believe, on Winnipeg Beach during the summer. And I was up in Hecla, and the water just gives things sometimes, and it gave me a spoon. And so I did like a clay work around that, and some of the vines that were twisted. And I think this is kind of where my work started going before I tackled the roots. This is kind of the pre-root idea. So this assemblage of this narrative object, and then a kind of clay response to a narrative object.
Okay. And what about the photograph that this is your album cover?
Right, my album cover. Yeah. Sure. Every month I'm tackling a new topic in my own personal narrative. So this, and then I'm doing a series of 12 self-portraits, and in those self-portraits I re-embody myself in a moment in time, surrounded by the objects that like defined me in that moment, and then also the root ball that will feature in that work. So here I am with the root ball that we had seen in the previous clay work. And it depicts my moment of arriving to Providence College in Manitoba, crash landing with my ballet shoes, a violin that I didn't know how to play, but I thought I would major in, just because I really didn't know how majors worked. I hadn't gone to school up to this point, and there I was in college, and I was going to major in violin because I love a good fiddle tune, and I thought I would just pick up violin. Then I have some 18th century poetry, and then also next, like you can kind of make them out, but I have hiking boots and point shoes because I thought maybe I would do professional ballet dancing. I wasn't ruling it out. I wasn't sure,
So how old were you at this moment?
In this moment, I was 19.
Well, that's how a 19-year-old should think.
Right. Right. The world, like, what do I want to do?
Happen. Yeah. Okay. Now you talk about the importance of connecting and finding an audience or creating an audience, even really, and how you have to do a lot of DIY on that, it sounds like, as a rural artist. So do you want to talk a bit about the Tiny Gallery project and how that all kind of unfolded? So, and I love your tagline for this. You have great taglines. No town is too tiny for a tiny gallery, which
That's right.
is good to remember. So this is another great shot. So tell us about the idea for this and then how it all kind of came together.
Well, the Tiny Gallery was a project that, like, I think in my third year, as I was like making that decision, like, do I move to the city and be a professional artist, or can I take myself seriously as a professional artist in rural Manitoba? And I arrived at, I don't want to move again. I don't want to uproot myself from the people that I love. So I'm just going to have to find a way to exhibit work and to create like that experience. And I think what I kind of arrived at was this sense of like, towns don't have the infrastructure to create the white cube kind of gallery that we typically, associate with a professional artist, have you exhibited in a white cube. And I think that there's a lot of conversation around that, and I think it's being challenged on multiple fronts, and I think it's an important conversation. But I also like the idea that people can have the opportunity to exhibit in a space that is just for art. And what often happens in rural Manitoba is that you can exhibit in spaces that are dual purpose.
Yeah, libraries.
Yeah, and it's great. It's like, it's a good opportunity, but in terms of people haphazardly see your work. So they're walking on their way to something else and they look, oh, that's a nice picture, and then they keep going.
Yeah.
And so I think that creates a lot of different things different ways of responding to art.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I wanted to do with the tiny gallery was, well, what exactly do you need? You need 4 walls, a curatorial statement, and some works, and then a little bench if you want to sit and actually like contemplate the work. So I installed my own work because that felt very non-threatening, and I didn't care if someone like graffitied all over them. I wouldn't have to explain to the artist, well, someone thought that this was, and so I put my work in there. It felt very, very possible to do that. And then I just wrote my own curatorial statement and then slapped a title, and it was a gallery. And then I contacted these places and I was like, hey, I have this, phone booth size gallery, but I should go back one image, if it's possible to go back one image. I think there's this, you can't see everything, but what this is like a shop space, a generous shop space. And I'm in the middle of the box, but there's a whole crew around me, and there's a friend who helped me build this box, another friend who helped me pick the colors, another friend who drove this box around. Like there's like this community, and then this space where I could just like keep this. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Like, so there's like there is a whole community of people. The rec, the Mitchell rec, they were like, yeah, sure, bring your tiny gallery to the arena. We don't know what this is. We'll find out. and this openness to see what it is and how it works, and to try and explain to people like, it's going to be like a tiny box and you're going to see art, and it's hard to explain, and then it's there, and then it makes sense.
And just tell us what were the images in the box?
Oh yeah, so this was for a class that I had taken in large format photography. So yeah, they were a series of arenas. Yeah, you can't. I should have thought to give you a better image, but basically, I'm not from Manitoba, obviously, and I think it's amazing that there are these spaces, like these arenas, that like towns are tiny, but like people pool together to get this arena. And I think there's a lot of complexity in that. So there's like a lot of shared identity, but I think when I look at an arena space, there's also not everyone is a hockey player, or not everyone finds a sense of place in an arena. So arenas are like the place of community, but if you are located, the title of the exhibit was Outside Looking In. So this sense of like, I'm outside this structure, and whatever you bring to this structure is your experience of this structure. So you can bring this positive sense of like, oh, that's where, I grew up and I had this sense of place and community. But you can also bring like, that's where I felt ostracized and like I never could connect. And it's like this community center. And so I think arenas, are really interesting places, and they are like a quintessential landscape mark in a small town, especially like those like, there's one in there, like I think the St. Adolphe one that has that, the curling rink has that little peak, like they're great. They're so interesting.
Yeah. So what happened with the pandemic and the tiny gallery?
So the tiny gallery currently is sitting in a forest in a friend's place. And just kind of waiting there. This idea of the tiny gallery has emerged into a much bigger project where my friends and I are going to start a microbrewery and gallery that features rural-based artists in Steinbach. So it's a really big and exciting project. And
that is.
Yeah. And so it's sitting there and waiting for that moment when it'll reemerge. And so whatever is on view in the main gallery there will be a reproduction in the tiny gallery. And that will travel around Manitoba to tiny towns where, so you don't necessarily have to attend the gallery to see the work. You will be able to see the work in your own town, in your own space. So the tiny gallery will return, but currently it is sitting in a forest and just waiting for that moment, waiting for summer.
Yeah, to be reborn. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. There's something neat about the idea. I mean, it's interesting that it's about the size of a phone booth, because phone booths are disappearing, right? And yeah, and so that you can go in and it's just your space for a moment, you know?
Totally. Yeah.
Bring whatever you bring, I guess. And yeah, that's a really neat idea.
And this is like Tiny Gallery 1.0. I know that there's like a little step there. It's not accessible. I need to redesign it. So like this is like project number 1. And there's lots of things to think about. Like the conversation will just move from this point into, it had one iteration. And so now it will be, I'm excited to see where it goes. It's just wait.
And how did people respond in the first iteration?
So well. I think one of my favorite memories was we installed it at the Red Wing Diner in Grunthal, and everyone warned me about Grunthal. Oh, Grunthal, are you sure you want to go to Grunthal and put it in the Grunthal? And I think that like speaks to a lot of stereotypes we have around rural communities. Like, is it worth your time? Like those people out there, what do they know? And I mean, I'm being a bit facetious, but it's there are a lot of stereotypes about rural people and the uncultured world of farmers or whatever it is. And so I think when I approached the Red Wing Diner and they're like, yeah, sure, put it up. I don't know what you're talking about. What is it? Okay. And then I think when I went to pick it up and someone was passing by and the Red Wing Diner owner was out and someone was like, what is that? And he's like, it's a tiny gallery. It's where you have art. Like, it's obvious. It's like, it's been here for ages. Don't you know? It's a tiny gallery.
Oh, yes. Here's the bulletin board. And do you want to just tell us about the bulletin board?
Oh, yeah. So this was in Newbie. So one of the things that I think rural art maybe suffers from is that lack of knowing that there's like this other community of artists that are like there's so many things, and of course the internet helps with all of this, but there's something about the tangible world, and I think one of my favorite things of no, I shouldn't. Favorite is a big, like, it's not just one experience that I really enjoyed while attending the School of Art was seeing all the little paper flyers with like names of exhibits that were going on. And you just get the sense of there's just so much happening and like you can't possibly keep track of it all, but you're like in the midst of it and it's all like it's giving you ideas and you think, wow, someone's doing a whole body of work on that one thing. That's amazing. So what I wanted is like, if an artist steps into this tiny gallery, they can like look and there's this board and it has the things that are happening concurrently with this exhibit that's going on in the tiny gallery. So like this is, you know, way back,
back when, you know,
when there were exhibits.
When there were shows and openings. Yeah. But that will come again. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, the tiny gallery is a space for the audience and for artists to feel like we're part of a bigger thing that's going on and you're not alone. And here's a thought.
Important message right now, for sure.
Yes.
And then you also kind of did another project that was also, and again, great tagline, on view until snow or vandalism ends it, which is perfect. And yeah, in one of your statements, you say, if you're not familiar with rural Manitoba, saying we lack gallery space is an understatement, unless the ditches and alleys function as artist-run public gallery spaces. And then we have miles and miles of gallery spaces. So so this becomes kind of an advantage. And so, yeah, so tell us about this project.
That's right. Yeah. So it was fall. And And yeah, I guess I was feeling like maybe it was too vulnerable to install the tiny gallery anywhere. And it was, it's pandemic time. So again, thinking like, I don't want to stop working. Like, I don't want to stop producing work.
Yeah.
And how can I do that? And so I have a deep appreciation and long-standing relationship with ditches. Like, I played in the ditch as a child. I love the ditch. And I think Manitoba ditches are some of the most underrated spaces in the whole province. They are places where whole ecosystems thrive. Like, do you know what a black, like a red-winged blackbird looks like, except for the ditch? Like, that's where they inhabit. Like, there are these worlds, these microcosms that are these little anyway. So I'm very pro ditch. I love ditches, and so it's a very natural place for me to start like thinking about them as like, cars pass them quickly, but they still pass them, and you get views. And what is this idea of who counts? Like, who counts as a view? And if you're thinking about like who attends White Cube galleries, that's a very slim population of people. So then when we're thinking about audience, like, who counts as an audience member? Is it the people who are like going for a walk along your along the ditch? And if it's a question of like how many people see your work, well, if we're thinking of equivalencies, then you have two people pass your work in like a space like Giroux, and then all of a sudden, like, that's the equivalent. I think in my blog I mentioned, like, if you have 4 people in Giroux, you have the equivalency of 30,000 people in Winnipeg. So that's a lot of people who have attended your exhibit.
Percentage-wise, you're way up there. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wanted to do this project kind of exploring like what is it to be an exhibiting artist? What is it to have an audience? What is a gallery? What is at its root? What is a gallery? It's a space to view, and so What if the ditch was a gallery?
And so it's and this, what we're looking at is like, it's a mannequin. That's the base of it, and then what's happening?
Right. So I on a First Friday, I found a mannequin at Arts Junction, dragged it back home, and then I did 3 installations of it. So the first one there was a lot of grass in that ditch, and then in this one, it's in an alleyway in Mitchell. After installing in the ditch, I was made aware that there are rules about where one can install things. I was like, but the ditch is for the people.
It's for everyone.
It's for everyone. No, apparently there are rules, and there's a whole infrastructure around the ditches, but whatever. So then I approached like the people I knew, who I knew I could be like, I want to install a little sculpture with trash and a mannequin. And so this person was like, yeah. So then I installed this one on in an alleyway in Mitchell, and what I did with each installation was whatever was from the previous installation I brought forward to the next site, and then I installed also like garbage. Another thing that I love, garbage. They're so interesting. Garbage is interesting. Like, you can make really interesting sculptures with garbage. So I installed garbage around. And also I found a wonderful thrifted dress at the local thrift store.
Oh, okay.
And then in the final installation, I put her with her dress of garbage and rebar and everything right at the field. So it looked like she was like looking out into this vast open field. And there she was. And then she disappeared. And that was it. That was the end.
Okay. And let's just see her in transit, which is also.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
The wonderful side, the practical side.
Exactly.
I have a car that I call it an art car, and I warn people before they come, if they travel with me, I have an art car because there are things in this car. There are sticks and clay and everything. Yeah. And
really?
One of the things that I did with, you can see like clay flowers. I like the idea of like recognizing that like I have installed this work here for this time, and now I'm going to offer something back to the earth so there's some clay flowers there. So clay, unfired clay, so that when I put the clay back, it will eventually become part of that earth in that spot.
That's
So
beautiful. Yeah.
there she is in all her glory, off to her final destination.
Okay. And how do people react to that?
Which part?
I guess if they just happen to see, I think you called her Allie.
Yeah. With each installation, she had a different name.
Oh, okay. Because she changed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah. Did you get like responses of people?
Yeah.
And what did they say?
They said a variety of things. I feel like 4-year-olds, it makes a lot of sense to 4-year-olds, and like, yeah, there's a lady in a ditch and we're going to decorate her with grass. That makes sense. And then I think I was telling some colleagues, like, yeah, I've been working on sculpture, installation, assemblage sculpture in ditches, and they're like, oh, I want to see. And then I'd show them a picture and be like, like this, what is it? Like, I don't know how to, I don't know how to respond to this. And I love that, because it's a genuine response to what is trash on a dress on a headless mannequin? Like, what am I supposed to be thinking about this? And what is it? And so people would ask the installation in Mitchell, for example, like, what is in your backyard? Like, what is this? And oh, it's an artist, and she's doing. It's about the environment, and like the about the environment and our human response to it. And I guess people find ways of talking about it and explaining it, and I think I'm really curious about that, the non-art world approach to art. I think that curatorial statements can be very much a barrier to accessing art.
That's a really interesting point. Yeah.
Yeah. So finding a way to encourage dialogue that is not in the art world, and is able to be a genuine kind of like, what is that? Is that trash on a dress on a headless mannequin? Like that should be in a curatorial statement. Like we should be talking with language that is accessible to people, and we should be thinking about these works. And just because you can't access a curatorial statement doesn't mean that you're not having really important, profound ideas around something.
Yeah.
So how to make assemblage sculptures of headless mannequins accessible to people. I'm curious about that. I want to know. I want to practice that.
Okay. Let's talk about mentorship, because you are right now taking part in a program that's run by MAWA, and they partner with different organizations depending on which part of the province they're operating in, right? And right now it's with the Manitoba Arts Network, I think. And so it pairs a number of rural artists in one region with a mentor, right? And so tell us about that. And I mean, I think mentoring is just a really good model for learning and developing and focusing, and for anybody. But is it especially important for rural artists, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I would echo that it is important in general, like mentorship, having someone come alongside you who's been where you're trying to get to. And I think for rural, I think it would be important for all artists, but for rural artists, maybe that why it's important is unique. And I have to say, like, through the Manitoba Arts Network, we're being mentored by Brenna George, who is based in Winnipeg. And I think initially I was like, but does she know? Does she know what it's like to be a rural artist? And I have to say she is very sensitive to all of the concerns and the barriers, and has helped, certainly has helped me grow my practice in ways that are really important. Like, So I would say mentorship for those of us who are outside the perimeter means that we have access to expertise that isn't obvious to us. Like those sometimes it's hard to even know how to like bridge the gulf, because you're not even sure what the gulf is, or like you haven't even imagined a bridge over. So having someone point out, well, this is how we do things, it has been exceedingly important and very helpful.
Okay. And yeah, and let's just look at some of the work that's been made by some of the other artists in your mentorship program. So this is by Kelly Click.
Yes. So she's also.
I used to have a Brown Betty kettle or teapot just like that. I think a lot of people have.
Yeah,
great work.
Yep, 4 of us. Kelly Click, she's doing this assemblage work around the umbilical cord. She's a midwife who is now turned her energy into, pursuing artistic career.
Neat.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. And let's see what else we have.
Cindy Weave. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, she's a graphic designer and illustrator, also a painter. And she has focused her energy into creating and illustrating a book. So this is her work during the mentorship program. Really quite incredible too.
Yeah. Okay.
And Kelly Murray, so her work is around the natural Manitoba landscape. So she's located more north, like in Stead area. So that's like an hour and 45 minutes probably from Winnipeg. Like, and her work is around the natural landscapes and the forests and the water especially.
Okay.
And Tanufe is a friend of mine who, sadly, because of the pandemic, we were meeting together to create work. He is local to Steinbach. And just an incredible abstract artist.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, and I think one of the mitigating factors to being an artist in rural Manitoba is meeting up with other artists. So meeting together, talking together, and even though work can be very different from each other, like just knowing that someone else is out there and creating work and meeting together. And I think this is probably true for many artists, whether you're in an urban setting or in a rural setting, is important. But I guess in a rural setting, when you have so much isolation and you don't necessarily have that camaraderie of knowing that there's multiple galleries that are exhibiting work and you can go and attend them and meet different people. Being able to like share with other artists what's happening and what you're doing and the work that you're producing is just I think it's critical. It's certainly proven critical to me to know that there's other local artists who are like their practice.
Okay. And as you said, you used to be able to get together physically with him, but now are you, like the rest of us, are you managing to use social media or Zoom or connect in other ways? I mean, I noticed some of the images are social media. They're picked from social media, and obviously, I mean, a lot of artists are using social media right now to kind of connect and share. But are you doing that as well?
Yeah, a little bit, but not as much as I guess could be the potential. There's certainly a lot more potential out there for whether it's like live streaming, working in your studio. I guess that would be another way to cut through that barrier, that isolation barrier. I guess I have yet to really take advantage of technology as a barrier breaking thing in my own practice and isolation in the art world.
Okay.
And I think there's something about proximity that's important. That there's something about like living in the same town or close to the same town. something happens, and I don't necessarily have the words to describe exactly what it is, but my sisters live in England, and I feel like there's like this whole fundamental, because I don't bump into them in the grocery store, or I can't just pop over to their houses.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's this gulf that and yeah. And so like, if I know that there are artists practicing in Winnipeg, and I could drive over there, and within an hour I could be with them, but there's this distance gap that's like maybe a mental gap, or I'm not sure exactly how. So knowing that there's like other artists who are practicing and working on their own practice independent of me, but still in the same 15 minutes away, that to me is so important. And I don't know exactly what that why that matters, but it does.
Yeah, no, it should matter. I think you're right. I mean, even if we use these virtual tools, we're not virtual creatures, you know.
Right. Yeah.
But you do raise an interesting point that a lot of the networking in the art world does depend on running into people, and at openings or at parties or at at the coffee place and so how do you network with curators and gallerists and art writers? Is there a way to do that? What should rural artists, what can they do to connect in that way?
Well, it's a good question. I don't know if
very honest answer. That's good. Yeah.
I mean, it is a big barrier. I think my answer right now is become a curator. Like, I don't know. Like, I think having people sensitive to the barriers for people who live outside the perimeter, like, and like, these are barriers that every artist is going to face regardless. So like rural artists in Manitoba to Winnipeg, like that's one barrier, but then the art world like is huge, and like New York, does New York know where Winnipeg is? Who knows? Like, I mean, maybe some people do, but like you're always going to have that problem. I think the gatekeeping and so I think what I'm learning is that it's just important to like keep pursuing my practice.
Yeah. And maybe, I shouldn't be putting on the onus on you also. Maybe I should be asking like curators and gallerists who live in the city, what are you doing to reach rural artists, and maybe go beyond, the people you already know, and run into. Yeah.
And I think if you go back to like Audrey Hebert, so Audrey is somebody who is like done work like all her life. I feel like she is like somebody who has lived in rural Manitoba all her life, and has not tapped into art world resources. And she ends up selling her work like in Minnedosa, which if you're not familiar with is like 3 hours. It's a 3-hour drive, and also Souris. So it's she's somebody who has like been exceedingly resourceful within her context, but someone whose care and attention to materials and her devotion to the theme of trees. I feel like she's an artist who would greatly benefit from more accessible bridges in her practice, but they just haven't even been a category. So I think her work is a great example of like somebody who's been creative, but for whom like access to the art world would also be like change her, like give her more resources.
Okay.
It's just
that actually, we've just gotten a question from one of the viewers. How would you encourage others of us in our own little worlds outside of urban places? So that might kind of.
I think what I have learned, or what I'm maybe learning right now, is that to rely on the community around me. There's a whole community of people who are interested, caring, and want to participate in making cultural work happen. And what it requires is, unfortunately, I think it requires vision from artists. So and I say unfortunately because that detracts from the artists doing their work, their own, devoting all of their energy to the production of their own work. And I think when you're in a rural setting, you end up spending a lot of your energy making things happen. So I guess I don't know if that's encouraging that maybe there's people around us in to connect and to rely on, and which is hard to say in a pandemic, I realize.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that is encouraging that that you don't have to be thinking about Winnipeg necessarily. I mean, there are things you need from Winnipeg, obviously, but you know that yes, turn to the people around you and you know, and create audiences and connect with community.
Take yourself seriously. Like this is, if you want to, I feel like I'm going to take myself seriously as a professional artist, even outside the city. But I guess I also need I need ideas. Like I need that. I need to know that I'm not alone, and I need to know that there are other people thinking thoughts, and I need to tap into those thoughts. And I need the city. I need the urban space. Like we were talking about Mawa's retreat, like the residency. So they have a place that artists can apply to go to and be in. And I feel like for rural artists, that's so important because like, I need to saturate myself in ideas. Like I love ideas. And sometimes I feel like there's the fields have ideas, but I can't talk to the field, and I need more than that.
Yeah.
Knowing what's out there.
Yeah. And the Mawa thing is great. I mean, they have an apartment like right on Main Street downtown, and and a rural artist is invited to come and stay, and so they can do all these things and not have to worry about driving home, you know, at night, you know, after a long day. So that must be, and you can,
you can buy all your material, and then you don't spend the next 3 hours, you know, driving. You can you can go to an exhibit.
Yeah, exactly. So are there any more questions coming through? Is there anything else you want to say, Alexandra? We covered a lot of ground, so yeah. Okay. We're going to wrap it up then. And this has really helped me a lot. And I'm sure for city viewers, it's probably opened their eyes. And for people outside, beyond the perimeter, I'm sure it's been really helpful and valuable to them as well. So I just want to thank you so much, Alexandra, for sharing your insight and your experience and your art. And
thank you so much for the invitation and the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks everyone for tuning in. And thank you to First Fridays. And we'll see you next month. Thank you.
Thank you.